Welcome to our regular monthly NAACP Allentown Lehigh Unit meeting. This is February, which we all know is Black History Month, so it's a very special meeting. So in recognition of Black History Month, we have a special conversation prepared for everyone. We're going to start with greetings from our president, Walter Felton.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Black History Month of the Allentown Chapter NAACP. As of February 12th, 2022, we have passed 113 years old, okay? That's a long time to be out helping people, assisting people, surviving, and people helping us to get started. That's a long time, okay? I'm proud to be a member and honored to be the president, and honored to have the people on the executive board that's here tonight and that weren't able to make it to be here, be part of our team, okay? And if you're not a member, you need to join and become a member, okay? Become part of one of the Allentown area's oldest organizations and maintaining scrim through when we do things, what we do, where we do it, and how we do it. As a combination that makes a strong team and longevity. And at this time, I turn it back over to our third vice president, Cheryl Watts. Thank you, Cheryl, and thank you everyone that's here on the executive board.
You're welcome, Walter, and very happy to see the conversation that is going to happen here tonight. We talked about a number of topics for Black History Month, and we decided we wanted to begin by making history now. And let's talk about Black economic development. Last year, attorney Michael S. Jackson presented to us the story of Powell Steel, an amazing story of a proud Black man who dedicated his life to reviving and growing a business that he was once an employee of. And Powell Steel faced many challenges, but all in all, it set a standard for large Black businesses. To be the largest steel provider in the northern region by a person of color was no small feat. Well, Michael said he would come back, and we're very happy to say that he's here with us this evening. And we're also pleased to say that we now have an economic development chair, Maurice Muhammad, who is very familiar with the concept of taking on businesses and creating businesses as well. Torchlight Realty and Progressive Realty were the result of him looking at opportunity and seeing the opportunity and making the most of that opportunity as he continues to do work throughout the Lehigh Valley, Pennsylvania, and New Jersey in property management as well as development. He can talk more about that. But it would be wonderful to hear the outcome of the conversation of these two gentlemen this evening. So Michael S. Jackson, attorney, and Maurice Muhammad, I leave the conversation to you.
Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you. Thank you. And welcome all to your Make History Now, Black Economic Development. Myself and Michael Jackson have been having this conversation for over 3 days, and it's just been nothing but just nuggets and a lot of good information that has been coming out as a result of it. And you know, as a topic in one of the platforms as far as Black economic development, I like to just first, you know, it said that you want to begin with the end in mind, and I'd like to share what the intent and the purpose of what we plan to do in this conversation. We want to be able to just impart information and make it possible for those that may be in business already, those that have a desire to become in business, or those that just might want a business checkup. So the information is vast, and it's an intent to meet you where you are in order for you and us to grow, because it's open. You can send your chats and questions in the chat, And we want to make it like a fireside chat and a conversation to make it so that it's comfortable and that you be able to share and benefit. Hopefully this could be something at the beginning of a series of information to helping those that want to start business. So with that being said, would like to get to allow Mr. Jackson to introduce himself in a little bit about himself, which he wanted to do. Definitely though, there will be no thriller or moonwalk requests allowed in the chat.
Yeah, none of those jokes. Although I've heard every one of them, you know, in my lifetime. So unless you can come up with something new, you know, it's not allowed. But listen, I'm happy to be back. Last year we had I believe a very fruitful and very informative session, and I was thrilled that I was asked to come back again to continue the story, because as I said last year, I left off at the point where, you know, Powell Steel was at the zenith of its success, how it had risen and really became one of the fastest growing businesses in central Pennsylvania, and even probably Pennsylvania, but also one of the largest minority-owned construction companies and manufacturing companies in Pennsylvania, possibly, and we never could confirm this in the US. But here's the thing. For those who weren't or don't remember the story from last year, Powell Steel was started by a gentleman named Steve Powell, and he was a minority African-American who came to me at a time when he had been offered the opportunity to acquire this steel fabricator. And at that time, it's kind of an unusual story, but he had no money, no capital. He just had a desire to own a business and a will to make it happen. So he was smart enough to come and form a team and to come to me as an attorney to help him put this deal together. So we managed to put the deal together. He acquired the company and he became a great success. And he was rolling along, doing really well. I think he started the company in 1997, 98. I can't even remember now. But in any event, he was, it might even have been earlier. It could have been 92, but in any event, he was doing well for the period that he was involved. And then, you know, the Great Recession came in 2008. And just like many businesses, he was knocked off his feet, but he was in a position to actually weather it much better than a lot of other businesses because he had an extensive accounts receivable. He had a significant, almost $1 million in accounts receivables that he could live off of. So
what was that in? What was that in, if you don't mind sharing what those receivables?
Okay, so accounts receivables is just money or revenue that you haven't collected yet, but that is owed to you. So you can put it on your balance sheet, and you know that at some point you'll be collecting this money. In his case, because he was in the construction business, his payments came out over time as the buildings were constructed, and then there was 10% of every project that was held in reserve. So if you imagine, if he had revenue of at his height, he had revenue of about 20 million. His accounts receivables would be about 2 million, so or more actually. So he had significant money that was owed to him. But the problem was that around 2008, and here's where the story takes off. Around 2008, when the recession came, banks were running scared. They didn't know what was going on, who was going to be left standing, and anyone in the real estate or manufacturing business was suspect. So Steve Powell had gotten his start with a community bank in Lancaster, and they had given him a line of credit, and they had given him the financing to make the acquisition. He had a good relationship with the banker. What happened was that over that 10-year period, 15-year period that he was going well, the banking relationship has steadily changed. I don't know if you remember, but in the late 90s, early 2000s, banks were being gobbled up, and his bank was bought by a larger bank, which was then gobbled up by an even larger bank, and to the point where at some point his relationship with the bank was no longer one-on-one. He didn't have to know who he was dealing with.
Right.
So the bank wanted to get out of the business of providing money to manufacturing and real estate, but they couldn't do it to Steve Powell because he was making his loan payments. Everything was going well, but the bank panicked and they were just waiting for him to show a loss. And at 2011, he finally, on his balance sheets, he showed a loss. So under the debt covenants of the loan, the bank was able to call his loan. Okay.
So you dropped a few nuggets, and I just got it just for the sake of the audience and just those that may not be aware of what a line of credit might be. And just if you would speak to the point that you made, we talked about of the creative way he created the financing of getting started, because I think that might be important to the audience and for those that might want to hear that way of being able to create finance where there's not any, because you mentioned that yesterday. Is that the same one, the same person? It's
the same person, yeah.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so basically, Steve Powell and Powell Steel was a story that I think it stands on its own in the annals of corporate and business startups, in the sense that, like I said, he was very creative. He came to me with no money, and basically, I said to him at the time, I mean, why should I represent you? What are your chances of actually being able to make this happen? You have no capital of your own. How do you buy a business and you don't have any capital? Well, he told me that's why he came to me. That's why he came to me. He wanted me to help him come up with a plan. So we sat down, and this is kind of part of what we talk about in terms of economic development. We came up with a plan to use all the possible sources of financing that are out there to help a business start or to continue. In economic development, there are a lot of economic development agencies. And one thing that Steve he was a pillar in his community. He was known by a lot of people in the Lancaster area. So the first thing we did was to figure out what public financing was available, whether from the federal government, state government, local, what money was available for a business, and what are the requirements to get that money. So we went to the federal government, the SBA. It didn't quite fit with what he was trying to do, but he went to an economic development corporation in Lancaster. I think it was just called the Lancaster Economic Development Corp. And they told him, well, look, one thing that a lot of people don't really realize is that the Department of Agriculture has money for businesses in Lancaster. So why don't you try the Department of Agriculture? So we went to the Department of Agriculture, told them what we were willing to do, and they had a loan guarantee program where they said, if you can find a commercial bank willing to give you the loan, we'll guarantee 80% of the loan. So you go to the bank, tell them that we'll guarantee 80% of the loan, and then you only need to come up with 20%.
Now, was this specifically for minorities and Blacks, or was this what was this for?
Was just basically for small businesses.
Small business owners, okay.
Small business.
Gotcha.
And you had a project that they were willing to, that they saw some development involved. And development could be anything from improving the community enhancing the infrastructure, creating jobs. I mean, we kind of painted it as a job creation. You know, if he could buy this this business, which was actually, they were suffering too, you know, we would create jobs. So we got them behind. He went to a bank. The bank was an SBA bank. They liked the idea of Department of Agriculture financing or guaranteeing their loan. So they were on board, but we still had a gap of 20%. We went to the state. The state had a loan program for minority businesses. It was called PMBDA at the time. They liked the idea, and they said they would provide some portion of what he needed to operate. And so we then went to a minority fund that was forming to come up with the rest of the equity. The minority fund ultimately did not. You're on mute, Maurice. The equity fund. You're on mute. The equity fund ultimately did not get off the ground. So, long story short, we got to the closing table. We were trying to close, and we were like 10% short of the money that was needed. The bank wouldn't close. Everybody wouldn't do it. So we got up on the table. We thought the deal was done, but then we really thought about it, and we went to the seller, and we offered the seller an opportunity to get equity in our company. So the seller took equity and basically closed the gap between the 10% that we needed. He gave us, essentially, he lowered the price, the sales price, by 10%. And we also managed to get a contract from a company that needed minority representation. So they gave Steve the contract before he actually owned the business, which was, so long story short, it all came together. We acquired the business, and within 2 years, he was doing so well that he paid off the seller, and he got the seller paid off in 2 years' time, and he paid the bank in probably about 5 years' time, and then he.
Yes, sir. No, not to. So to that point, that was the point that we wanted to bring out, was that there's, you know, not to make it seem like you don't need money, but there's always ways. Don't allow money to be a hindrance from you, you know, starting a project, because there's a lot of creative ways to come to, you know, to put the deals together, and all the good deals will always find the money. And that was the reason I asked that question.
Well, that's true, but and with respect to what Steve did, he was smart enough to know that if you're starting a business, you have to have more than just an idea in your head. He took the proper steps, and he listened to his professionals and to the people who he had around him. And the first step that he took was he assembled his team. I wasn't the only one that was part of his team. He got a lawyer. He knew he needed a lawyer. He got an accountant. We got and went and found a banker who was willing to do the deal, but the banker said he could only do the deal. Everybody else was also willing to do the deal, but the banker was very much in his corner. He also, so he had everybody in the team that he needed. And then we took the team and we developed a plan for him. We put together a plan of action, but basically a business plan, a financial plan. So the long story short, he did everything right. And so what I wanted to emphasize this year was, in spite of doing everything right, he ultimately went out of business. You know, and it was a precipitous crash that how he went out of business. And I'll show you, just for me, you know, I feel like his going out of business shows the problems with the economic system in America today. You know, to me, it was a failure of the the system to lift up a businessman who needed help. Okay, in this case, you know, you had this majority bank that called his loan, even though he was current on every payment. He had never missed a payment to the bank. They weren't out of money. They were getting the money, but they called his loan anyway. So he had no line of credit. So you asked me, what was the line of credit? Well, the line of credit for him was basically because he was in construction, and I told you that cash came in at different times. A lot of his money is in the accounts receivable. It didn't always flow. He needed a line of credit to pay his cash flow needs. And as his money came in, then he would pay down the line. And that's the way it would continue. When they froze his line, they thought they would put him out of business because he would have no cash flow. But they didn't know Steve Powell. When they froze his line, he just worked harder. He went to every one of his customers who owed him money and asked for them to pay him the cash that they owed him earlier than they typically would. And in fact, we were collecting our accounts receivables in 30 days or less than 30 days. And he was able to stay in business for another 2 years after they froze his line, drove the bank crazy because they didn't know what to do. Okay, so what they ultimately did, though, was because he still was losing money, because at this time everybody was losing money, they put him in bankruptcy. You know, a creditor, if you owe them money, they ultimately can file bankruptcy against you. So it was an involuntary bankruptcy. He didn't file it. He didn't feel a need to file it, but they filed it against him. So we had to defend against this bankruptcy.
Can you elaborate on that, what that means for those that may not have a clue on what an involuntary bankruptcy is, you know, or someone that may not, what is an involuntary bankruptcy? What does that mean?
A creditor, and the bank was a creditor, can allege that you as a business entity is basically insolvent. That is, that you have more liabilities than you have assets, and that you are potentially going out of business, and that they are in harm's way because you won't be able to pay them back. So they declare bankruptcy. They declared a Chapter 11 bankruptcy, which is a reorganization. Okay, they call for him to either reorganize his business such that they could be paid off or go out of business. So, now, there's something that happened in that 2-year period where his line was frozen. And the reason why he was able to survive for 2 years, besides collecting on the accounts receivables, was another instance where I say the system and this the racism that's inherent in our economic system, in our capitalism in America, but not only in our system, but just in terms of the construction industry, manufacturing industry. And I say that without, you know, any hyperbole in terms of saying that there's this racism, because the numbers bear them out. You know, in most of the industries in America, you know, you have Black businesses that have more than one employee constitute like 2% of the businesses in America. You know, I mean, to me, that's an incredible statistic. And in most of the businesses, you know, they are so far below our share of the U.S. population. But the only businesses where we actually, and not only are we 2%, but there's a big disparity in income that Black businesses make compared to white-owned businesses. Black-owned businesses generate like there's like a 40% disparity between what one business makes over what the other one makes. And there are about 124,000 Black businesses that make or that have over one worker in America. And that constitutes, like I said, less than 2% of the total number of businesses. And they've calculated that if Black businesses were on par with white businesses in this country, they would make up about $1.6 trillion. That's how much that disparity is for us. So all that being said, Steve Powell was in a position where there was a contractor, majority-owned contractor that owed him money. And the reason why is somewhat complicated, but it had to do with the SEPTA line that was built on Market Street in Philadelphia. And they owed him money because they were thrown off the job, but they worked out a settlement. And they owed him $150,000. We went to get our $150,000 from them because, like I said, we needed every dime. And they told us basically to go pound sand. They said, we're not giving you $150,000. We didn't get all the money that we were entitled to. So why should we give you anything? And I said, you're not seriously telling us that because we're a small Black-owned business, that you aren't going to give us anything. He said, and they said, no, we're not going to give you anything. If you have a problem, sue us. So Steve got up and said, okay, I'm gonna sue you. We engaged in a lawsuit that took 2 years and about $100,000 of money that he didn't have to sue them. We took them to court in Philadelphia and ended up with a $3 million judgment in our favor. We won $3 million. I settled it for $2 million. We got $2 million, and that kept them in business for the next 2 to 3 years. The bank was livid because it's now been over 2-3 years, and they still haven't put us out of business. So they declared bankruptcy. I fought the bankruptcy, got a bankruptcy attorney. We fought it, and we fought it for another 2 years. They still couldn't put us out of business. And not only that, but we were getting, now the economy was starting to change. We were starting to get more business, and people were starting to hire Steve Powell. But 2 things happened. One was, no matter what we tried to do to get capital, no one, all we wanted was somebody to take out that bank. Just give the bank their money, take them out, and we could go on and live happily ever after. No one would give Steve Powell money. They wouldn't invest in him, despite the fact that he was the most successful Black-owned business in Pennsylvania. So he ended up getting sick, and I think that ultimately was what ended the company. He got sick, came down with cancer, and literally died a year after the bank was able to finally liquidate on. The bank was just relentless and would not, no matter how much we offered, we litigated, we tried. For 5 years, the bank just tried to put him out of business, and it took his death, really, to put him out of business. And so it's a story. It's almost like one of those Shakespeare tragedies, where he was on top, and then at the very end, he dies of cancer. And the banks, the equity funds, everyone we went to should be ashamed of themselves for not supporting a Black-owned business in this country. But they wouldn't do it. So that's part of why I'm here. That's the Steve Powell story. But we're going to take this and be on a more uplifting program, because I believe that right now is the time to strike. The iron is hot. There's a lot of opportunity out right now. And a lot of what I do is helping businesses get started, understanding economic development, community development, the sources of capital that are out there, public agencies, private. And those are some of the things that we're going to talk about in the next half hour that I have that I have left. I'm just joking.
Okay, so man, you just dropped a lot of nuggets, man, and a lot of information there. You know, and the first thing that stuck out to me right away was the fact that as you was, you know, relaying and laying out the story, how much of that battle contributed to his health. So speak to the racism and how that implicit racism is involved in what we do when we go into business and all the things. And you spoke to the industry, right? And that how it's definitely entrenched in the industries, real estate being one of them. You know, in real estate, there's a shortage of commercial realtors. We're underrepresented. We're underrepresented in property managers. We're underrepresented in appraisers. We're underrepresented in insurance agencies as Black professionals, and we're underrepresented in inspectors. That's just to name a few. And like you said, to your point, the numbers don't lie, right? If there's a statistic out there that's done, you know, every year, and one of them is called the Sheba Report. And in the Sheba Report, it talks about the economy, the Black economy, average economy of a Black person is, some have it at 5,000, some say about 5,500. The average Hispanic person is 12,000, some, you know, give or take 10 to 12,000. The average white person's economy is $112,000. So to your point that the numbers don't lie, it's not that they're, you know, not qualified individuals, but those numbers speak to that, you know, and that was one of the things. So just to your point of, you know, and can you speak to the implicit racism inside of the industry, how it affected that?
I can, to some extent. They say that one of the reasons for the disparity, economic disparity, is that there's this vast ways. There's two things. One is a wealth disparity, and the other is a wage disparity. And they said about 43% of Black workers earn less than $30,000 a year, whereas the median range for white workers, 43,000. They say the reason for this wage differential is that like 60% of Black workers work in low-paying jobs. You know, healthcare, food service, and I don't mean they're doctors or, you know, they're restaurant owners. They're, you know, sweeping the floors and taking care of the bedpans and whatever. And they said that disparity, and they said it's hard. You can't, in America, it's hard to start at entry level and organically rise through the ranks and become, you know, wealthy or a manager or whatever. They say it just doesn't happen without sponsorship or allyship. You got to have somebody who's lifting you up, and it just doesn't happen. Black workers don't. So they said the major reason for the wage disparity is that there are so few, to your point, Maurice, there are so few professionals given the population and our percentage of the population. The doctors, the lawyers, the architects, the managers, you know, there's not enough of us to cut into that wage disparity. So until we start our own businesses or develop our own businesses and have our own and support our own professionals, you know, I'm sorry, I'm a proponent of kind of that 1920s, 1930s, the support of our own Black-owned businesses. And that's what I've dedicated my career to. And that's what I wanted to say, that in terms of just talking about my background, I had a very varied background. I've worked for majority white law firms. I've had my own law firm, and I did that for 10 years. I've worked as a municipal bond attorney. I've done securities law. I've been a corporate attorney for major corporations. And ultimately, I stopped all of that and went into work for Powell Steel because I saw the opportunity to rise up a Black business. And then I started with other Black businesses, Black-owned businesses. And frankly, right now, I left a law firm that I was working for to go in-house with another minority-owned company that's in the food service business. And I'm in the process of helping that business to hopefully become nationally known. That's our goal. So, and I say that not to point the finger at myself, but to say, like, individuals like myself and my wife and people who like us, my wife is also an attorney and has also gone in-house and worked for other companies and left large firms because I had the benefit of having what they call the best education in the country. Okay, I went to Princeton, I went to Harvard Law School. You can't really do much better than those schools. But in my years of practice, you would think that I went to a community college sometimes. The way that I was treated. Mm-hmm. So I said, you know what, if I can go to the top institutions in this country and you still don't get the proper respect that somebody who actually, somebody who does go to a community college, who's not my complexion probably can get, then, it doesn't do us any good to rail against the institutions. We know the institutions are racist. I'm going to call it like it is. They are racist in the country. It's built in, it's baked into the system. I don't know, and I really don't care whether individuals are racist because people are people. I accept people as they are, whether they're white, Black, brown, or yellow, they are. But to tell me that the institutions, the government, the economy, education, that they aren't racist, you can't do that because I've seen it all.
The numbers don't lie. You can see it in the numbers. It's in.
See it in the numbers.
Yeah. So one of the questions that you bring me to the question of, how and if a person that wants to get in business, right? And we asked this question last night, at what point should they bring in that team and what should be involved and included in that team? So you mentioned an attorney and accountant, and even if they don't, if it's not, funds are not there, what should that team look like for a person that's just starting a business and want to start from an LLC, just from the ground up? What should that look like for them?
You know what? I tell most startups that you're doing yourself a disservice if you don't get an accountant and an attorney. Build into your budget whatever it takes to pay for them, because what you pay now is going to bear fruit in the future, in the long term. Because I've seen businesses that didn't do it, that set themselves up and didn't do it correctly, or they set themselves up, but they only have the ability to be self-employed. They set themselves up in this one-man operation. They're not a business. They can't employ anyone. But when you find, like, most of the clients that I've represented, like Powell Steel, I represented Powell Steel for over 20 years. Over 20 years.
So are you saying that it's a difference between self-employed and being in business?
Yes, I would say, you can start a business, be self-employed, and if you really don't have a plan, if you don't have a team, if you don't really know what you're doing, you can make enough to maybe cover your expenses, maybe pay yourself something, and that's fine. If that's what you want to do, then that's okay. You're self-employed. Mm-hmm. You're basically almost like paying yourself a wage. But if you want to be a business, if you want to create something that will last beyond you, or even if you just want to create something that helps you help the community, does more than just give you a salary. A business to me is a generator for changing the fabric of communities. You know, a lot of what's going on today in our neighborhoods and our communities, I think is for two reasons. One is education. We're not getting properly educated. Our children are not getting educated, and I don't necessarily always blame the parents, although sometimes it's the parents, but for the most part, you know, there's a lawsuit in Pennsylvania right now that's going about the fact that Pennsylvania has been disparately, let me use a different word, has been like unequally paying and giving money to different areas of the state. The more affluent areas get more money, and the less affluent and the disadvantaged areas get less money. And if they can say that that doesn't affect the education that goes on, you know, they listen. And this is a quick aside. I grew up in West Philadelphia. I went to all Black schools for most of my as I was growing up. At one point, they decided finally integration was coming to Philadelphia. They were going to integrate Philadelphia. This was like 1968. They bused me to an all-white school. I went to that all-white school and I experienced a culture shock. I don't even know if that's even the right word for it, but I was so shocked that it probably could have derailed me for the rest of my life if I had stayed there. That school was so far advanced for where we were in West Philadelphia that for the rest of my life, I said, how can you live in the same city, have the same school district, and have education so different in different areas? So imagine if we can do that within Philadelphia. The white schools get more. They had books. They had new books. They were 3 levels of math ahead of me. They were teaching foreign language. We were barely getting English. They were already teaching foreign languages. So imagine, take that and multiply it when you have places like, the Main Line and these school districts, Upper Marion, Lower Marion, whatever, who get 3 times, and I'm probably a little off, but they get so much more than Chester gets, or Lancaster, or Reading, or Harrisburg in terms of per capita, per student. And it definitely affects the students who are in school, and I know I've seen it. So education, and the second thing that really affects how we really the discrimination that's in our country is basically how businesses are funded. Okay, we get very little access. Black businesses get very little access to credit. They've already shown, the numbers show that we're 3 times more likely to be denied loans from a bank. And that's why I said, with Steve Powell, and even with the client that I have now, the first thing I do is exhaust all public and private social equity, whatever, public funding sources. So there's the SBA, there's these economic development corps in Philadelphia, PIDC, in Allentown, the Allentown Economic Development Corporation. They have money and financing that you don't even realize they have. And if you go through their programs, you'll realize and find different programs that will finance little projects that you have. And if they're not ready to finance a project that you have, you go to them and you ask, how can I qualify for some of the money that you have? And they'll turn you on. The state has a Department of Community and Economic Development that is only there to foster economic development, which is the long-term economic growth. They don't care what it is, as long as it supposedly is helping the economy of a certain area. So we can't keep sitting back, and we can't keep thinking small. We have to think a lot bigger. And there are people out there, there are lawyers like me. The reason why I had a law firm for 10 years, the reason why I only had it for 10 years is that I couldn't get clients. My goal was to represent Black-owned businesses. I couldn't get Black-owned businesses, either one to come to me and my law firm. I had, we were 4 young Black attorneys. And Philadelphia is one of the, to be what, the 4th, 5th, wherever we are now, largest city. We're probably like the 25th city in terms of number of Black-owned businesses compared to other cities. Cities that are much smaller to us have a better record in terms of Black-owned businesses. That,
so what can we do to make a dent in that, and as a community, with those that know, even if it's a very daunting task, the numbers don't lie. What can we do as educators with being professionals and being a master of your craft? You know, having been coming from having a Harvard education, Princeton education, what can be done where we can meet people and help meet people where they are to create a dent in that, you know, what we're talking about? And because it's real, to your point of, we don't have to question that. It can be denied and you can go into not denial about it, but the proof is in the pudding. I mean, when the PPP loans came out, one of the things that was discovered was how many single man shops was realized as a result of in the Black community, right? So what can be done? Like what is it, how can, as far as education, you know, I know from my perspective, I teach the class because of that, to try and make a difference and create more licensed real estate professionals, more, and to steer others in that industry, appraisers, mortgage reps, you know, home inspectors. And because a lot of times people don't know that it's not that difficult. It's not as simple, you know, it's not really that big of a task. So the question is, I guess, how can we help the listener or the one that's going to see this later and may ask the question, what can we send them home with something that they can pick up and use tomorrow that's going to benefit and help them further their business, or help them to kind of, you know that exists, but still navigate through it anyway, you know, because you've done that and you do that. Some do that. You know, the racism is going to be there, it's present, but one thing that beats it is excellence. So how can we prepare others to be excellent enough to supersede that and not even, you know, does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And it's been the issue for so long. Look, you can only ask people to do so much. So right now, you have all these corporations who are claiming to, you know, they're setting up these funds, or they're trying to help Black businesses. You have public money that's being put out there to help Black businesses. The problem is that in many cases, Black-owned businesses don't have the education to, you know, and I mean the business acumen in some cases to really to go after that money, because there's always an obstacle. There's always something that they say that
well, you described that with,
well, like they will say, okay, you have to have 3 years of financial statements. And so the Black business says, 3 years financial statements? I don't have an accountant, and I don't have financial statements. I never use it. I just file my tax returns. So, and then to hire an accountant and then do a forensic, you know, investigation and try to put together financial statements, they get frustrated, or they're told you have to be certified as a minority-owned business to get managed. And then when they see what's required in order to become a minority-owned business, it's like, oh my God, how much paper do they want? They want every contract I've ever done. They want, you know, they want to know my own personal finances. They want to know X, Y, and Z. And so people get frustrated. But I'm gonna tell you that the businesses who have come and when I was actually representing businesses, and I'm not now because I've gone in-house, I'm the chief legal officer for a company called Strother Enterprises. Okay. And they will be the first to tell you that I've represented them for 30 years. Now, that should tell you two things. One is that I'm old as hell. You know, the second is, no, I'm sorry, I've represented them for 40 years almost. Okay, I've been practicing law for 40 years. I started representing them almost like 5 years out of law school. The second thing is that they've been in business for 40 years. And the reason I take some credit for that is that all along the way, I've been able to steer them into different directions and keep them moving in the right direction. And that's why finally I decided, you know what, since I'm not with Powell Steel anymore, I'll go in-house with this company. And one thing that we did is that when the pandemic hit, and we're in food service, so we lost 90% of our revenue, 90%. We, you know, because what did they do? They closed down all restaurants, they closed down all concessions, they closed down everything that had to do with food. So we were making no money, but I tell you what, I found every public, you talk about PPP, I got every dime that PPP was willing to give.
Wow.
And every dime that they needed, and they're still going strong through the pandemic. We didn't lose a single person because of the pandemic. We're now, actually, we got contracts, and they went before the pandemic, they had 40 employees. After the pandemic, they have like 70.
Wow. So the person that's interested in trying to do that and look up a person like yourself to do that, and they want to do that, what should they do? Who should they look for? Find someone like you to do that for them.
Find a young attorney, there's plenty of young Black attorneys who just want clients to come to them. Who want someone to believe in them just like they believe in them. I can't tell you, and my wife will tell you, I can't tell you how many clients I took on for free. You know, just saying that, look, I'll take this ride with you.
So wait a minute, let me make sure I understand exactly. That's a nugget though. I think that's a nugget you just dropped that I gotta just milk it for a second. So you're saying that if there's attorneys out there that would be willing to take on for free, if the deal is right, if the deal makes sense, can you just talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, and don't let me, you know, nothing's free, right? So I wouldn't take them for free, but I would say I'll defer your payment. I'll defer your payment till you actually have some money to pay me. So I'm taking a risk that you can accomplish what you say that you're going to accomplish. I'm not going to do it off of somebody who comes on off the street and just says, I have an idea, or I want to do X, Y, and Z, or I want to do something illegal. I'm like, show me your plan.
That's got to be lined up.
Yeah, put together your plan, assemble your team, show me that you can actually make this thing happen and that you have the will to make it happen. And so, no, don't just talk about it, be about it, you know? And that's all I would ask of them. I couldn't, you know, in many cases, people weren't serious about really starting a business because they didn't, you know, so if you're serious and you're willing to do the hard work, it can be done.
Can you talk about a little bit about the development side of things? You know, and we talked a little bit last night about opportunity zones and tax credits and bonds and things like that, right? And I know, you know, for those that may be interested in doing some flipping or whatever, the wholesaler, you know, how does that look as far as you know, can you talk about the development side of things that those that may want to get into real estate on that level, you know, that may have put because one of the real life examples that we talked about was I shared with you a proposal that I had put together for a city. It wasn't Pennsylvania, and it was to get site control over 72 of their lots, and it was 72 lots that they had that the city owned. Now, this particular city didn't have land banks. You know, some cities do have land banks. They didn't have it. The city had control of these sites, And it was a process where the proposal was either let me pay you $5,000 per lot, or you give me the lots for site control, not give them, because free is not the real operative word. It's really leveraging,
Right.
and putting in sweat equity. And it's not, so I don't want it to be, like when you say free, the clarity
Right.
makes perfect sense, right? So in that particular case, the offer was, or give us site control, and then we'll give $10,000 to every homeowner that buys the property that we develop on that site. And you gave the example of what was missing, the missing ingredient in that. So those kind of deals, out there for development, they're there. There's property that the city, the benefit to the city would have been that those properties come back to the tax rolls as tax paying properties. It brings a curb appeal back to the area, the neighborhood, with new properties being there. Also, it would have put a dent in the low to moderate income housing issues. Right now, we're suffering from a challenge that when it comes to real estate, and I'm using this word loosely, is regular people are not able to buy homes because the deals, they're being lost to cash buyers and stronger borrowers. So if you come into the table with an FHA deal or a FHA loan or a loan, and the real estate professionals that may be on here could attest to it. And the chat is open. If you have any questions too, drop your questions in the chat. There's a couple there that we'll read off. So if you bring a 100% finance where you maybe get down payment assistance and you have your down payment, that deal will get overlooked. I don't know how many offers we may have to put in for a person that may have an FHA or a marginal, maybe qualify for an FHA product loan versus one that's cash or conventional. So that's a whole nother conversation that, we could probably speak on, but can you speak to the development side of it and just kind of help with some steps to one that might want to get into development and use some of the resources that are available?
Yeah. Okay. So well, let's take, for example, real estate development, or even, just a basic real estate project. What I tell people or clients or whoever who come to me and say, look, I have this idea, this project. I want to buy a block and develop, single family homes. And I think it's a great idea and the city should buy it and blah, blah, blah. And I say, okay, so the first step, if this is what you want to do, is you can't, good ideas. I mean, it starts with a good idea, but you normally, for us, you can't get finance for just a good idea. I say, you have to get site control. Okay, so, and what I mean by site control is, well, I mean, I think that's fairly obvious, but it's like, if you're going to do a real estate deal, figure out some way to have the ability to get financing off of that property. The best way to get financing is to have something tangible. So you can get site control sometimes, and this is where you could possibly sell the government. You say, listen, I don't want to buy the property right now. I just want an option to buy. Give me an option. I only, maybe it costs you $10,000, maybe it costs you $5,000, maybe it costs you $30,000, whatever the government and whatever you're looking at. But you pay a whole lot less. You maybe get the option for 6 to 12 months. They give you an option, then you take that option, that site control, and you develop your plan, and then you go to maybe one of the public sources of revenue, or you go to a commercial bank. Either way, because in some cases the commercial banks either have an obligation to do community redevelopment, right? Or they will do it because under the SBA, there's certain loan programs or loan guarantee programs. So, you know, find a way to actually have something that you can leverage.
Mhm.
You know, and if it's not a real estate project, then if it's you know, I want to own a number of franchises. Well, you have to find a way to at least get one franchise that you did on your own, whether you get money from friends, family, hook or crook, whatever. You know, you can raise money, buy one franchise. And once you have one franchise, then it becomes, you have something tangible that you can show financial statements or whatever. And then you could possibly get additional financing from, like, it doesn't have to be a commercial bank. It could be like, one of my clients wanted to get into owning and operating franchises. So it got one franchise that was financed by a economic development corporation. They said, if you can come up with 10%, and if you have some collateral to provide, and collateral is an asset that you use to secure the loan, like a mortgage. You know, they gave the Economic Development Corporation a lien, the ability to mortgage their home. So it was like a third mortgage. They already had two mortgages, but what the lender wanted to know was, are you really committed? Do you have skin in the game? Are you so committed that you're willing to lose your house? Which they rarely do. They don't really go after your house. They want to know just how committed you are. So if you're really committed to the idea, then you put some collateral up. They provided them with the financing. They say you have to come up with 10%. They came up with 10%, and they really came up with 10% over time, because they spent it like on construction costs.
Gotcha.
And that's how they were able to do it. And then once they got the one, they were able to get another and another and another, because now other banks wanted to take part. They wanted to get in on it.
Mhm.
So you have to start somewhere. You just have to start somewhere.
Gotcha. So thank you for that. We definitely have to do another part to this, and probably at some point look at, revisiting and having a conversation with this piece. And there's a question in the chat that if you could explain a little bit about what an opportunity zone is. Those that may not know what that is. What is an opportunity zone?
Well, that's and okay. So opportunity zone is almost, it's like it's a tool. It's something that was passed during I think it was passed during Reagan's. During Trump's administration. But essentially what it is, it's a tool for economic development, but it's really for the wealthy, but it's positioned like it's for, for developed and underdeveloped areas. So so the government creates these census tracts, these areas, and undeveloped or areas that need to be developed in cities that they call opportunity zones. So they said, if a developer creates an opportunity fund, they can use that fund to raise money and then take 90% of that fund proceeds have to be used to develop a project that's supposed to help that community, housing, business, whatever. The fund can generate money from investors who, the kicker to the whole thing is that investors can invest in the fund, and the advantage to the investor is that they get to defer the capital gains tax that they may have from other investments. So say I have stock, I own stock in Microsoft, and I expect that I'm going to owe, 100,000, I don't know, whatever, the wealthy, whatever they pay. But by investing in this opportunity zone, they get to defer their capital gains.
Gotcha.
So they don't have to show that tax,
So it's like a tax credit, deferred the tax and
tax deferral.
tax deferral. Okay.
Deferral. Because they don't, it doesn't offset it. It just defers it for 5 years. But if they keep deferring it and they either reinvest in another opportunity zone or they leave it in that one for 10 years, if they don't get their money back and they leave it in there for 10 years, then the government says, we'll waive your capital gains. Any profit, and capital gains is basically the appreciation or the profit that you make on your investment.
And is
So
that what makes it different from a 1031 exchange because of the waiving of it?
The 1031 exchange is a way of tax deferral. It's the same concept, except they made it easier. A 1031 exchange is, I have a piece of property. I have a property.
Okay.
I sell it. When you sell real estate, you have to show if there's appreciation from when you bought it, you show it as a capital gains.
All right.
And you pay a tax on it. But if I don't want to pay that tax right now, the IRS allows me to basically, instead of taking out my money, I basically get another piece of property that I actually put that money into that property, and it's a 1031 exchange. And I keep deferring my capital gains, and it builds and it builds and it builds until finally I say, you know what? I've made enough money that I'm willing to pay the tax.
Right. Got you.
So who does that help? It ostensibly is supposed to help the neighborhoods and the area communities that they were putting up these development projects. But a lot of the projects, they started saying, you don't have to be in disadvantaged areas anymore. We'll let you do an opportunity zone in Beverly Hills.
Right.
Or someplace. So essentially, the wealthy found a way.
A loophole, because originally they were all outlined. It was a map that of where they were in the beginning, and that ended up changing. So that
but Mark, just say this. I cut you off only to say that, be that as it may, the opportunity zone concept is still a great way for us to develop, to use to our benefit and actually use it for the purpose that it's supposed to, right? I mean, we can do economic development in disadvantaged areas because that's what it's for. All you have to do is find people with enough investment that they're willing to invest in that project to protect their capital gains. The government has given you a vehicle to entice investors. I'll tell you, when I started my legal career, one of the things I used to do at the law firm that I was with were real estate syndications, which were actually real estate tax shelters. I had no idea what real estate securities, any of that was, but I got into it and I said, you know what, I'm going to learn what the heck is going on. And what I found was you had these real estate projects that were losers. People were like buying, these developers would come in and buy a Kmart. They would tack on all these fees that they would get paid. So they would get paid these fees. And then they would say to the investor, look, I will pay you 75% of all the profit that comes out of this project or any of the losses. Now, truthfully, these investors didn't want any profits. They wanted the losses. Mm-hmm. And at that time, there were tax credits. And you asked me about tax credits. Well, there were tax credits that you could sell, you could basically give to the investors. Tax credits was a 1-to-1 reduction on the taxes that you owed. So they would, by investing their money in this project and it losing money, it would allow them to take a tax credit and tax deductions against their income that they were making over here. And they wanted that. And because at the end, they knew at the end that project was going to be sold and they would make some money on that side. So there's a lot of investors out there who just want either the tax credit or the capital gains deferral, or they just want some way not to pay taxes.
Got you. So I think that's a great place to put a pin in it, so we can start, maybe possibly come back and pick up on that topic in either 1031 exchange, opportunity zones. There's so much more in that, as well as some of the other topics that we talked about. I wanted to take this opportunity to express on March 30th that we will be doing a first-time home buyers class for those that may have some interest. We'll be bringing some industry professionals and to help give just from A to Z the information as to how to become homeowners and just get information on the process, the home process, and with the intent to add value, and give you a value add. It's free, and you can invite whoever invite whomever you like. And just wanted to add that for March 30th coming up. And I would like to also just point out just three bullet points and goals for the Economic Development Committee. As the chair, one of the goals that we have set, right? Our intent is to develop and strengthen initiatives to create jobs, businesses, and other economic opportunities in poor urban and rural communities. Oppose budget cuts that will harm poor urban and rural communities, and to ensure that economic development programs such as community development block grants and Section 108 loan guarantees reach poor urban and rural areas. So I just that was one of the things I wanted to just point out at the top of what our base in our platform and what we want to work on as far as the Economic Development Committee. We'd like to thank you for the opportunity to bring this information, and hope that there's something that was shared. One of the nuggets that I did receive is we should always leave our audience and stop talking before our audience stop listening. So we want to put a pin in it there. And if you have any closing remarks, Mr. Jackson?
Well, I would just close by just saying the only thing I really want to emphasize is that growth is inherent in us. We can always grow. Mm-hmm. And as a business person, the one thing that you have to be is not afraid of failure. That's all. Just, success isn't final, but failure is definitely not fatal. You can fail any number of times. Fail forward. Yeah. Other thing is
something that you can learn in that lesson, man. There's a lesson.
Everything
not to do.
The next level, and just keep it simple. We may have talked about a lot of terms, and some of which people don't necessarily understand yet. But if you keep it simple and you build on your knowledge, but you don't limit yourself, think that you can accomplish whatever it is that you want to, as long as you put your will behind it. But just keep it simple to the point that you I'm laughing because there was a question about how old is too old to get started. And there is no age that's too old to get started. If you have the will and the health and the ability, do it. Because my client, I have clients who are like in their 70s who are as vibrant and trying to get things going. Steve Powell, God rest his soul, was 69 when he died. I think he would have been going strong for another 10, 20 years. So there's no such thing as too old. There's no such thing as too young. I mean, well, there is such a thing as too young. But, frankly, if you have the idea and the will, I've seen some young people in high school who could put rings around, some of us. So anyway.
Thank you for your time. Thank you for that. we'll turn the floor back over to who's Cheryl?
Yes, thank
Thank
you so much. Thank you, Maurice. And please take note of what Maurice said about the Economic Development Committee, and that there's a program coming up on March 30th. Please stay alert to the Allentown NAACP social media for those further details. Michael Jackson, we cannot thank you enough. What we appreciate about you is that, yes, you went to those schools, but you did it with a mission, and you consistently return and give back to our community all the things that you learned while you were there. And so you can simplify some of these concepts and break them down for people, because sometimes people just like to complicate things to keep you from paying attention.
Exactly.
So thank you for simplifying some of these concepts. And we're going to continue to look to you to guide us on some of these things as we work towards moving our community forward into greater prosperity and greater health and greater education. Thank you. And on behalf of all in the NAACP and our president, Walter Felton, good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you.